Guten Tag, it's me, WNT. Lessing is one of the hardest units to recommend. Not because he's bad, though I'm sure there are people who will disagree with that, but because, well, a lot of games will have hugely popular build guides for different strategies or characters. From other gachas to Elden Ring to Warframe to plenty more. It's a popular genre because those things can take a bunch of expertise to figure out, a bunch of time or resources to perfect, or both. But Arknights is a bit different. While yes, you do have to farm resources to build operators, how to build them is pretty straightforward most of the time. At most, you need to look up what their main skill is or if the mod is worth the blocks, but that's kind of it. So instead, guides like mine tend to focus on other aspects. But Lessing is different. Lessing just doesn't really have a main skill, at least not in the traditional sense. He definitely has gameplay niches, and actually can do quite a bit in his kit. From heli dropping and the biggest damage reduction in the game, to AFK funny red numbers, to combined high DPH and utility. But all of those things come on different skills. And what's more is which mod you want to build highly depends on how you want to use him. While it might take a bit to explain why you'd want to build him and how best to use him, I can recommend Evenholtz with just a S3, M3, and Max's Delta mod. Lessing, on the other hand, requires actually digging through his kit so you can figure out exactly what it is you want from him, and then working backwards to recommend what to invest in from there. Because of this, I'm going to be doing things a bit differently, starting with his talents as usual, but saving his mods until after we've talked about his skills, so that I can recommend them based on which skill you'd want to invest in. Lessing is a Dreadnought Guard, meaning he has 1 block, high attack and HP, but very low defense. In retrospect, this subclass was kind of the prototype for Crushers, though with a much faster attack interval. And I've always found it really funny how HG went from seeing them get criticized for their less than 300 defense, and decided, actually, the problem is that we didn't go far enough. But like Crushers, the best Dreadnoughts also have other forms of survivability built into their kits, and Lessing is no exception. His first talent lets him take 35% less damage from enemies he's not blocking, though notably this only takes effect when he is blocking someone. Still, this is kind of a lot of damage reduction to give a unit, and I appreciate that if they were going to make it so conditional, they at least had the good grace to use that restriction to balance around giving it a much stronger effect. Like, this is even more than Gladia gives the Abyssal Hunters with her mod, though without the HP recovery. And while, yeah, it's conditional, outdoing that as the biggest form of personal damage reduction in the game is still notable, especially considering that this is just the base value, before it gets increased by a mod and multiplied by one of his skills, and regardless works quite well with his large HP pool. His second talent works with this nicely as well, as when he takes damage, he gets plus 16% attack for the next 15 seconds. This is great for his skills, as 2 are multiplicative with this talent, and the other has a relatively low attack boost, so you'll really feel this no matter how you're using him. And so, regardless of skill, the loop is clear. He takes very little damage from ranged enemies, and uses them to boost his attack while he deals with his main target. Also, this is a rare case of a kit directly confirming that yes, a character really is a freak like that. Lessing's S1 is an AFK power strike, and at M3, every third attack will deal 290% of his attack. Normally, I'd kind of skip over a skill like this. I mean, most people don't exactly freak out over power strike skills, and notably unlike his S2 and S3, this skill has no additional form of survivability, and relies entirely on his high base HP and stock damage reduction. However, it still works surprisingly well for him. For one, he just has a really high attack stat on top of this being multiplicative with his second talent, and one of his mods gives him another attack boost as well, so that 290% ends up doing some pretty massive numbers considering how often it comes up. But it also kind of fills a notable void in his kit. His S2 is an on-deploy skill, so you have to retreat him to use it again. And his S3 is up for 20 seconds and down for 40. So this is legitimately his best form of consistent damage, and a great option for when you just can't wait for the cooldowns on the others. I will say that yes, there are plenty of other options for consistent damage in the game, even if most don't quite reach his DPH here. Though again, Lessing is one of those units where you're using him because you want to use him specifically. That said, waiting 40 seconds for his S3 usually isn't really all that prohibitive, and it's far from the longest cooldown in the game, but still this skill does have a surprisingly solid niche within his kit. Also, this is one of my favorite skills in IS. If you can get the right relics, you can have him doing 30 to 40,000 damage per hit, every third hit. Like, he has forever spoiled me for red numbers. No one scales quite like he does. Lessing's S2 is kind of criminally slept on. Like, when he was announced, people pretty quickly identified his S3 as his main niche, and mostly left it at that. But his S2 has just as many applications, even if working around regular unit redeploy times in a post-Texalt game can feel a bit unwieldy at times. This skill activates on deployment and lasts for 24 seconds, during which Lessing's first talent is multiplied by 2.2. He gets plus 60% attack, and he hits twice per attack. If the damage reduction he got from his base talent was already the highest in the game, this just makes it nuts, bringing it up to 77%. And this is, again, pre-mod. However, this doesn't increase his survivability against the target he's fighting directly, making him not nearly as well suited for dealing with the biggest threat on a map, like a boss or whatever. But that's also not really what he's for. Compared to the other Dreadnought Guard heli drop skills, he gets a much smaller attack boost, instead having his double hit accounting for a lot of his DPS. This means that against lower defense values, he is by far the best option, but that he falls off against higher defense in a way that a unit like Neural just won't. While that makes him sound worse than them, in my experience, it's actually given him a nice niche of his own. Instead of trying to compete with them directly, he's just doing his own thing. While he's not necessarily going to be your first choice for dealing with the biggest threats, he works remarkably well at helping you manage the stage while you deal with those threats, which turns out to be a super important thing as well. Not to make him sound like he's meta in IS, he's not, but this also has a lot of application in some of the most annoying stages there. Water and Fire Union in IS-3, where you're under pressure from multiple juiced up Pompeys, he can still drop in and take out enemies no problem. Man-Made Carnival in IS-4 annoying you with the Chapter 10 mobile artillery, he can eat that damage and come back for more. The Sweet Leg Stomp destroying all your operators and forcing you to leak the other enemies, he can handle it. And it's not just limited to IS either. Anywhere that range damage is preventing you from properly deploying your units, he can disrupt that and give you a foothold as you set up and take over. In fact, my personal favorite application I've found was in CCP1. Anyone who's around then may still be having nightmares about the drones and the stupid wheeled seat things that they spawn. Once you ramped up the difficulty, pretty much anyone you deployed would instantly be evaporated unless they were in the reeds, and blocking in those reeds was a major liability. But not for Lessing. When I niched the event with Arknights, I could deploy him there no problem, because while he was blocking someone, he just wouldn't take that much damage from them. And that was before the mod that improved his damage reduction. So while this definitely isn't an every map kind of skill, it is still a meaningful niche that no one else can really fulfill, and one that can be incredibly useful and fun for creative players. Finally, Lessing's S3, the skill he's known for. On a 40 SP cost, he becomes immune to negative statuses like freeze or stun, over doubles his max HP, and his attacks deal 220% of his attack as physical damage when hitting a blocked target, with the skill lasting 20 seconds. Additionally, you can activate this skill while he's already affected by a negative status, but he'll take 600 arts damage for doing so. Though honestly, you can kind of forget about that last bit. With this leaving him at about 9,000 HP, you're not really going to need to worry about the extra 600 damage here all that much. What is a more meaningful constraint to keep in mind is that he only deals increased damage to blocked targets. This is consistent with his damage reduction skill wanting him to be blocking, and as we'll see, the mod X trait wanting that as well. But know that he'll be doing just his regular attack numbers against any unblockable enemies with this one. Anyway, That note aside, there's a reason that this is what he's known for. While I maintain that his S2 has a very meaningful niche, this skill is a lot more clear about the value that it brings. If you've played Chapter 6, you can see the value in 20 seconds of full status immunity pretty clearly. And if you haven't gotten there yet, well, good luck. Now, it is worth noting that he's no longer the only operator who can shake off status effects like this. The limited Pepe's S1 can do a similar thing, though notably for a single attack rather than a full 20-second duration. So if she gets frozen or stunned again, well, hopefully the next single attack will take them out. Additionally, there are other forms of status resistance from Therapist medics, with fellow Welfare Lumen being able to go as far as clearing statuses from allies. And what's more is that these statuses don't come up nearly as often post-Chapter 6. However, they're also just one of the most annoying mechanics to come up against, much like how his S2 manages to deal with strong ranged enemies who are similarly very, very annoying. So when these things show up, you'll be glad to have them in your back pocket. And unlike his S2, this skill is a fair bit more flexible in terms of what it can deal with. Its high DPH, which is just a bit shy of his silly S1, means he can power through pretty high defense enemies, and the extra HP actually gives him more survivability against the enemies he's dueling rather than just from range damage. While I think his S2 makes a case for being his best skill, this would definitely be his default skill if you're bringing him everywhere. As while that one specifically wants to operate in a certain niche, this one is much better equipped for handling things outside of its respective specialty. While his S1 gives you a form of insurance for making him work in situations where the cooldown or relatively short uptime from this one becomes a liability. So now that you know his skills, and might have an idea of which you want to use, which mod goes with which skill, and what do they even do? Lessing launched with his Mod X. This one increases his attack to 115% when attacking blocked enemies as the trait change, and builds on his second talent, bringing the attack bonus from plus 16% to plus 24%. This mod provides a really nice baseline for him. He has a lot of multipliers in his kit, and this gives him another one and increases one of the existing ones. This works really well on his S1 and S3, boosting those red numbers even higher, and still complements his S2 nicely, helping compensate for the skill's lower attack boost. And the trait change is really easy to trigger since he always wants to be blocking someone anyway. This is probably the mod I'd recommend first, and if you're not sure how you're going to use him but don't want to wait to build a mod, go for this one. It's more flexible and works best with the skills that actually let him stay out on the field, making it generally easier to use. His Mod Y, on the other hand, is less well suited to general use, but still finds a meaningful niche. Its trait change allows him to stay on the field after being defeated for the first time, recovering his HP and increasing his attack speed by 30, but reducing his max HP by 60%. Meanwhile, the talent change, affecting his first one this time, increases the range damage reduction from 35% to 40%, and adds a new effect, letting him ignore 12% of the defense of any enemy he's blocking. The numbers on this are, at first glance, fairly conservative, but that's where the use case for it really comes into focus. Because his S2 multiplies all of that by 2.2, where it takes his damage reduction from 77% to 88%, and gives him a 26.4% defense ignore. So while it may be a bit less desirable on skills without that multiplier, it'll make a big difference here. For one, the trait change gives him a bit more survivability against the enemy he's actually blocking, something that's missing from the skill itself. Then it increases his already game-leading damage reduction, fully leaning into using its conditional nature to increase it all the way to the moons and back. And finally, it gives him a comparable defense ignore to the limited 6-star Dreadnought, Neural the Radiant Knight. While her mod does take her slightly ahead of him, that defense ignore also makes a much bigger difference for him than it does for her. Neural already has a huge attack stat on her Heli Drop S2, and as such can get around high defense with her DPH alone, not to mention her doing true damage on S3. But with Lessing's S2 giving him a lower attack stat in favor of a double hit, this lets him be much more competitive across a much wider range of defense values than he could reach otherwise, even with his Mod X boosting his attack. He still won't beat her against high defense, same with Scotty, But to those who don't have those units, or to those who just want to use Lessing anyway, you will notice a significant difference in his performance on S2 with this mod. And hey, technically the extra attack speed from the trait change can benefit his S1 power strike as well. So how you build him really comes down to how you want to use him, and it kind of comes down to a flowchart for me. If you want him to stay on the field and use a burst focus skill with a unique status effect repelling niche, go S3 and mod X. If you still want him on the field, but want to have an option to get a bit more consistent damage rather than dealing with that 40 SP cost, try adding S1 masteries as well. And if you're okay with redeploying him between skills and want the heli drop biggest damage reduction in the game dueling skill, go with S2 and his mod Y. Yes, that's a lot of investment. And it's okay not to want to do it all at once, if at all. But I do like that if you use him more and find that you really like him, you'll have new things to experiment with over time as you invest in him further. And it's rare seeing 6 stars where all 3 of their skills legitimately fit into their kit like this, whether or not they fit into the larger meta. Anyway, do you have any M9 units, and who are they? And how often do you use all of their skills? But that's it for me. Thanks for watching, and thanks to my members Pusa15, Shali, Lasat, Lena, and Apparent Angel. Your support helps keep this channel going. And with that, Auf Wiedersehen.